Welcome to The Business Strategist, the show for CEOs and founders ready to scale fast, lead smarter, and build a business that doesn't rely on them. I'm Adam Strong, award-winning strategist, former elite athlete, international speaker, and 3 times best-selling author. After 3 decades in business, I know exactly what it takes to grow, scale, and exit with impact. Each week, I dive into real conversations with industry experts, bold entrepreneurs, and clients navigating the uphill struggles of business, giving you the tools and the strategies to create more profit, more freedom, and more impact. Let's get into it. Hey guys, I just wanted to grab your attention because we've just created a brand new resource for you guys called the Exit Playbook, how to shift from operator to visionary leader. Now, this was based on a podcast that I did a few months ago and is the leadership blueprint for being able to help yourself successfully exit your business. Now, we go into many different things. We're going into some of the common symptoms of why founders get trapped in operations and what to look for and the impact that it actually has on you. We also go into some deep dive exercises that addresses some of the fears, some of the reflections, also how to basically let go of some of the control that you have, but more importantly, how to shift your identity within your business and how to align your strategy to your exit and how to challenge your belief systems, more importantly. Listen, it is a free playbook. The link is in the show description notes. Enjoy. I think you're going to find it a really useful resource. Take care.
AI is incredible. It can teach you how to fry an egg and even write a poem, pirate style. Yarr! But it knows nothing about your work. Slackbot is different. It doesn't just know the facts. It knows your schedule. It can turn a brainstorm into a brief. And it doesn't need to be taught. Because Slackbot isn't just another AI. It's AI that knows your work as well as you do. Visit slack.com/meet Slackbot to learn more.
All right, everybody, today's conversation is going to challenge a lot of what you think about, what you know about building and scaling a team. Now, my guest today is a guy called Barry Wolfe, and here's why you need to listen to this guy. Well, Barry has spent probably the best part of around 30 years in the trenches of that wonderful topic, HR, or human resources. But we're not going to be talking about wellness programs or boring HR policies and procedures. Barry's been working with public and private companies over the past 30 years, and he's been dealing with real problems that keep founders and CEOs up at night. The kind of problems where if you don't fix them, people will walk, deals fall apart, and then your growth stalls. He's the guy when your executives call up and they've tried everything else and nothing's been working when their best people are leaving and they can't scale past a certain revenue number because they are the bottleneck. So Barry is the author of The Little Black Book of Human Resources, which became a bestseller because it actually solves problems instead of splurting out just theory. But also, what's really interesting, he's got a new book that's going to be coming out very, very shortly, which I've had the opportunity to have a quick read. Thank you to Barry for that. What's really interesting is that his new book, it's actually very disruptive because it goes against the grain of most HR practices. And it's called It's All in Your Head, Why Psychology Doesn't Help Your Employees Deliver Value and What Can. Now, what's really interesting about Barry is that he's introduced a thing called what we call value-centric leadership, which is what we're going to be talking about today. Barry's got obviously a master's degree in HR. He runs a consulting company called Argos HR Business Solutions. And what's really interesting about Barry is that he's just a really down-to-earth guy. He really cares for people. Barry, I've got to be honest with you, when I first saw your book title, by the way, it's kind of off the cuff here, I thought, oh, great. Another HR guy practicing and preaching about HR, right? But then when you sent me a copy of the book, I started reading and I just thought, okay, well, that's really interesting. We have been sold on this ideology about managing people. We've got corporate companies, even 6-7-figure businesses that have spent millions on certain what we call HR, whether it be behavioral personality testing, whatever it is. And none of it is actually moving the needle on business growth. Now, what's really interesting, you've been sitting in the room with CEOs over the past 30 years, seeing how this all plays out. What have you seen? What's the most expensive mistake you've seen as a founder or a CEO or one of our listeners make with their people? And why do smart business leaders keep making it? Welcome to the show.
Well, yeah, thanks, Adam. No, it really goes back to in a way, the title of my book, It's All in Your Head. The single biggest mistake is that so many leaders, when it comes to selecting team members, will rely on things like tools of psychology, personality testing, they've got their competency models and so forth. And if you were going to ask me the single biggest problem in talent management in the world, and I really, this is going to sound cute, but I just really mean it because I've seen it over and over again. When we come back to when we think about the question of why do people fail in jobs, especially good people? Why do people not work out? The single biggest reason why they fail is because the people who put them in those jobs didn't really know what the hell they want from these people in the first place. Mm-hmm. I know it sounds cute, but we think about this in terms of part of the reason for that. There's two sides of that. First of all, it's because, and I'm sorry if this is going to get some of your listeners a little upset, but one of the things I've noticed over the years in terms of why do executives turn to things like personality testing for answers about who are the most critical people in your business, and you're going to rely on, a paper and pencil test for that answer. And so much of it comes down to the fact that so many of these people are simply looking for easy answers to very, very difficult questions. When I wrote my book, as you notice, the first part of it is really the story of the relationship between business and psychology. How did this stuff get into the business world? And by the way, as far as I know, I'm the first person that actually wrote this. My editor said, I've never seen this story told anywhere else. And one of the things that really shocked me when I started the research, I figured I was going to be taking shots at my HR colleagues, because they're the ones that are sort of, the mushy-headed English majors that are, frustrated and they're the ones bringing this stuff into the workplace. It's not that at all. As a matter of fact, the whole story goes back to just after World War I. And it was really the senior executives that just fell head over heels for psychological testing in their businesses, even though there was actually no validation at the time that any of this stuff really worked. They bought it because they wanted to believe it. And it's been the story for going over 100 years now. So you want these very easy, you're looking for an easy answer. They believe that, these tools will give it to them. And so they're willing to spend the money on it. But so that's part of it. The other side of that is that when I've thought about why are these people failing, when I say, okay, the boss didn't really know what he wanted from this person in the first place. Well, look, I think even your HR listeners would agree. It's not as though the solution is a longer job description or something like that. We're missing something. There's something fundamental, I think, that we're just not quite getting right. And that's where I came to recognize that we're focusing too much on what people do, and when we should be focusing on what people really deliver. So really thinking of it, the reason I call the process value-centric leadership that name, it's not about values. We've got enough of that stuff, but it's really about thinking about going back to first principles in the business. The organization exists to create value. So how do people truly contribute to value creation? And that's where when you think about how you're going to communicate that effectively, how you're going to formulate that as the executive, how you're going to do that yourself, you have to recognize then that the answer there is not focusing on the duties, not starting with the verbs, because nobody buys your verbs, right? I mean, people buy nouns. So what are the nouns that people produce? What do you want people to put in your hand, leave on the desk when they go home at night, change out in the wider world that people are giving you money for? And that's what we've got to start defining how we've got to be, where we should be starting when we to define jobs, as opposed to saying, well, I need a bachelor's degree and 7 years experience or something like that.
Yeah.
So
I guess that kind of brings me into another thought, really, because, I mean, like we said as part of the introduction, you've been doing this for 30 plus years, long time. been in a career? Obviously, you must love it. But I guess my thought is, okay, so you've been doing this for 30 years. You've discovered something which goes against your ethics, your belief system, everything that you've been taught around your practices. When did you decide, or when did that research happen? Number one. Number two, when did you decide to go on a mission to say, okay, I can't keep doing what I'm doing because it's unethical, because it goes against what I've actually done? Tell me a little bit more about the backstory.
There's been along the way of those 30 years, there's been a lot of bosses coming in enthusiastically saying, we've got to hire this person, get them. And so we throw all kinds of money at them, and we're so thrilled to have them. And 6 or 8 months later, of course, they don't work out. And then I'm the guy bringing them in, and then I'm the guy getting them back out the door. And it's a very frustrating thing. And it's not least of which because you see some people who are very talented, like all the rest of us, God put them on this planet for a reason. And, we talk them into believing that part of their life involves, our business. And we talk them into basically taking a wrong turn in their careers and then so easily move on to something else. And, I had a couple times with bosses who wanted to introduce, psychology tools and say, we're going to start using personality testing. And I can honestly say I never once came across a situation where there was some revelation of one of these tools that myself or some of my other colleagues, weren't looking at each other kind of crosswise across the table and going, yeah, I don't think this guy's right for this at all. So it got me very curious about, well, where does this stuff come from anyway? Why are we using any of these things? I can't be the only person that looks at it like this. Why then is everybody into these things? So I started digging into it a bit. And what really shocked me was, as I mentioned earlier, the science in this is not what I thought it was when I was being told that these are products of science. And I'd like to, if I could, jump in at this point to say, I don't expect anybody to take my arguments about psychology or my critiques as the definitive thing. I have I don't know if you noticed, but I have about 550 citations in my bibliography. So I've really done my homework on this, but I'm not a psychologist. I don't expect anybody to say this is the last word, but I put forward the best case I know how to make. So having said that, if I could just give you one little example that some of your listeners may find surprising.
Sure.
One of the most popular of these tools is the DISC assessment. And the guy that created that was actually also the creator of Wonder Woman. He basically, I read the book that this whole thing is based on. It's a book published in 1928 called The Emotions of Normal People. And long story short, it's basically a defense of sexual fetishism. And that's the point of the book. The most extensive research he reports on in the book was a surreptitious viewing of a sorority hazing event, and with some pretty nauseating sexual overtones, to be honest. And but that's just driving, millions of dollars of revenue around the world with these things. And this is also the basis of several other of these. There's also, among psychologists, I was very surprised to learn that the issue of people faking on these tests is a real preoccupation there. And there are some of these tools that will say, well, it's almost impossible for our test, you can't do that. So everybody can rest assured. And you can go out on YouTube and find people who will show you for free, as a lead magnet to paid coaching, how to cheat on these tests. So these problems have not been resolved. They're not going to be. When we step back and assess what really is the impact here at the kind of a macro level, if you will, we're spending billions of dollars every year in the United States. We spend about $2 billion every year on personality testing. We spend about $90 or so million on leadership development. Competency models go for about $150,000 a pop. And according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, median employee retention is its lowest levels in 22 years, where Gallup organization reports fewer of about 33% or so of employees consider themselves highly engaged at work. So when we look at these kinds of things at a macro level, we can see, for all the money that's going into this,
Yeah.
it's very, very difficult to see where this is making anything any better. And yet we keep spending the money every year.
You're seeing these patterns effectively. There's data out there that's clear in all these publications, yet people or organizations, businesses are just rinse and repeat and just
Yes,
keep doing the same thing over and over again, is what you're saying, right?
exactly. Yes.
Okay.
I think ultimately it just comes down to the fact that, any of your listeners, they have their idea about what a business should be doing, what they have to offer in the workplace. And while people like you, to a certain extent, like me, can help them come to those conclusions as to how to sharpen those ideas, how to actualize those, it's got to come from themselves, right? If nobody can give that to you. And ultimately it's the same thing when it comes to staffing in particular, finding and developing your best people, your key people in an organization. You have to figure out, well, what do you want from these people? People like you or, like myself can help get those answers, but you've got to sit down and think of that yourself. And it's not necessarily as easy as you'd like it to be, but there's really no alternative.
We'll come back to that question, which has come up at least 3 times since we started. So we'll come back to that. But I do have a thought here, actually, based on some of the listeners here, actually. So if, say, for example, I don't know, you're talking to a founder or a CEO right now who's been stuck, right? They're at, say, $5 million and they want to get to 20, or they're at $50 million in revenue and they can't break to 100. They've hired good people. They've invested in training. They've done the personality testing. The team building stuff, all of that nonsense. But they're still the bottleneck and everything runs through them. What are they missing? Because I feel like what you're talking about is, okay, well, if it's not personality testing, if it's not behavioral science, if it's not this, it's not that, what is it exactly?
Yeah.
What do founders really need to know?
Well, where I would suggest they start is ask yourself these 2 questions. Basically, kind of close the door, get a piece of paper and pencil, write down the answer to these 2 questions, which are not necessarily simple. They're simple questions, but difficult to answer, or they take some time. The
Sure.
first is really what are the drivers of value in your organization? What are the things for which people give you money? Now, when I ask that, I'm not simply implying that the answer is strictly in terms of customers, because a lot of people give you money for different reasons, right? The bank gives you money, investors, grantors, and so forth. And each of these people are looking for different things from you. Your customers don't care about your awesome cash flow any more than your bank cares about your chipper customer service, right? So thinking about all those groups of people, what are they giving you money for? And that's thinking of that as the essential, as basically the essence of the key drivers of value in your organization. And then for each one of those, ask yourself, what are the business results that you would look to by which you're actually delivering that value?
Yeah.
And there's a wonderful book called The 4 Disciplines of Execution. It's got a couple different authors, but the answer often, there was one, so many books, as I'm sure you find the same thing. A lot of your listeners do. You can often find that one little nugget that's worth the price of the book. It's 4 Disciplines of Execution. Very, very good book. But my big gold nugget out of that book was an observation that and I say this in the context of defining the key business results, that we always go to metrics. But one of the authors points out in that book that the metric is not the value. And it took me a while to at least in my case, it took me a while to get my head around that. But I really think I came to agree with his point. So sometimes the answer to those business results are metrics, but there's other times where they're not, I think. So you've got to look at just what am I looking at? What am I seeing? And again, I like to think of it as the nouns, not the verbs, the whole way through. So this is not the answers to both of these in terms of defining your key value drivers and your key business results. They don't start with verbs. It's nouns and noun phrases. It's this thing that does this or has these characteristics. And sometimes it's a metric, but not necessarily. But thinking about it in terms of trying to get to what are the things somebody puts in your hand? What's the thing that they leave on the desk when they go home at night? What are they going to change out in the wider world? And so thinking through those, I've worked with companies doing this. It's the step one of the value-centric leadership process. And we have 6 to 8 sessions of, they're supposed to be an hour, but they're always 2. We start talking through these things, and it's an iterative process, kind of sharpening, drilling this down. But ultimately what you get to is a document. I don't think we've had a single one over, say, 400 words. That it's 2 columns that shows these things, and there's no MBA speak, there's no soaring aspirational vision type stuff. It's just nouns and noun phrases. It can be understood by the C-suite and your 20-year-old machine operator on the floor, and everybody can see this. And basically, it's the basis of saying, if this is what we're all about, this is what we need from everybody. So I think just drilling it down to this simple, the essence of it all is really where the first place to start.
Yeah, very good. And we'll come back to your model on value-centric leadership, if I may. I mean, in your book, for example, that kind of got my attention was you talk about companies hiring people with great CVs or great resumes and having the right personality for culture fit. And then 6 months later, for whatever reason, everyone within the business then gets frustrated. It's then not working out. As to someone who's hired and fired hundreds of people, if not thousands, I know that there are probably lots of listeners on here that have lived through that nightmare, and it's very off-putting. Do you know what I mean? Like, because you get burnt for whatever reason.
Yes.
What are we getting wrong within the interview room? Like, specifically, what should someone like me be asking or getting out of that particular situation to tell me about their great, rather than just saying, what's your greatest weakness? Like, in this situation, this and blah, blah, blah. Like, that's all nonsense questions, right? But what should...
If you were a pizza with...
Yeah, exactly. So what should a founder be asking instead of all that nonsense? I'd love to know more. You're ready to exit, so why haven't you? You may be in business for 15, 20, 25 years of building your business, but the passion is gone. You're done. But one question keeps you stuck. Is the number close enough to walk away without any regret? What can you actually spend? What kind of life does it fund? And will you look back in 5 years wishing you'd stayed in your business? Now, our sponsor, Zentum, works exclusively with founders at this exact moment. They're chartered financial planners who show you exactly what exit really means. Your spending power, your options, even income that you can generate outside the business. They give you the clarity to pull the trigger with confidence or a plan to bridge the gap. Visit zentum.co.uk and find out if it's finally time. That's zentum.co.uk and find out if it's finally time.
The most important question when you hire somebody is not one you ask in the interview the interview itself. Before you sit down, before you ask for the job description or anything like that, write out the answer to this question. What are the 3 to 5 value-added deliverables this person has to produce in the first 12 months on the job? So think about, forget about your bachelor's and your 10 years experience. That all comes down the road. But ask yourself first, 12 months after I bring this person into the building, what do I want this person to have put in my hand? What do I want this person to have left on the desk when they get home at night? What do I want this person to have changed in the wider world? We so often think that the answer or the place to start is the really clever interview questions. I do some, interview training and so forth. And one of the things I point out, if you go out and if you do a Google search on, 10 really good interview questions, you'll find pages of results. But the problem is, most of that content is going to be geared towards the candidates. It's going to prep them for the answers. So if you're going to base your interview on the really good interview questions, the odds are very good your candidates are going to be better prepared for your interview than you are. So you really have to start first by understanding what are those things I want this person to deliver. And when you're clear on that, you've got to you've got a much better basis going forward. Not in terms of, again, yeah, if you were a pizza, what topping would you be, or something like that. But it's, look, have you delivered this kind of thing? I need somebody to get me from here to this. I need somebody to
Yeah.
produce this. Tell me about how you produce that, and then pick that sort of thing apart.
So what you're saying is basically using real world examples or real life examples that they may have experienced themselves. But what's really interesting from what I picked up from what you just said is you're basically laying down your deck of cards and saying, hey, these are my expectations for this role. Do you fit the bill? And rather than
Yeah,
kind of getting them to say, yes, 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 okay, share how you've achieved that. Is that what you're
yeah,
saying, right?
yeah, yeah. It's the difference between saying, this is a formulation I've come up with, this way I like to think about it. We pay people for activities, but we want to
Yeah,
buy results. So
of
rather
course.
than think about, we talk about in terms of, I pay a person for this and that. What do you want to
Yeah.
buy from them? And when you can get yourself clear on that, I don't think most executives can get to the bridge of, so what am I going to look at in there? What am I going to ask this person to help me understand whether I'm going to get this from them?
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense to me, actually, because I think that there is this, what you're really articulating is about what you're really articulating is really kind of laying out the foundation and saying, what do you expect from me? And what do I expect from you? So there's
Yeah.
this clear communication, should we say, this dialogue, rather than kind of using what I call
Yes.
checkbox exercises, which is what
Yes.
you're saying, right?
Exactly right. And by the
Perfect.
way, I would highly recommend a book. Just I don't want to make the one of the key books I came across that shaped my appreciation of this. It's a
Yeah,
marvelous book out there. I think it's the most underrated business book, an HR book, at least for 15 years or so. It's called Chasing Stars. It's by a Harvard business guy named Boris Groysberg. The subtitle is The Myth of Talent and the Portability of Performance. It's a dense book. It's a lot of small print. You got to
yeah,
really be into this kind of thing. But he really points out basically that the whole question of what makes a person successful in a job, he's done
yeah,
the research on it. And he shows what makes a person successful in a job is a far more complex question than just this discrete packet of knowledge, skills, and abilities that you're going to plug into a cubicle, if you will. It's as much about just simply understanding what the organization needs and how the organization gets done what it gets done. And
yeah.
so it's a marvelous, marvelous book, completely
Beautiful,
underappreciated.
beautiful. I want to again kind of go backtrack from what you said earlier. What was really interesting, I picked up a point which was now you started doing a lot of what I call exit interviews yourself, and you discovered that the best
Yes.
people weren't leaving because of not enough salary. But what you did discover is that they just didn't know what they wanted. From a founders and CEOs perspective, that to me is like terrifying, because it's like, well, how is it that I didn't articulate or communicate in a way that they didn't understand, like the disconnect? And because we all think that we're great communicators, really, we do.
Yeah.
But talk to me a little bit about this
Just ask him,
gap. Like,
right?
exactly, why is it so hard for someone like myself or our listeners to communicate what we need? And what are we doing that's making it actually worse?
The essence of the problem is that we focus on the verbs, if you will. We're talking about
Yes.
what we want people to do, not what we
Yeah.
want them to deliver. I'd like to frame this, explore this a bit if I could. I have a chapter because I think this answers your question. I have a chapter called What Every New Employee Wants to Ask and Almost No Employer Can Answer. When you go through in HR, of course, we're fanatical about our checklist for day one of the onboarding process, because everybody knows, a great first impression has a massive impact on a person's tenure with an organization. So we make sure we show them, here's where the pens are, here's where the coffee creamer is, and here's where we all meet for ice cream on Fridays and so forth. But the one question above all that every new employee wants to ask, and they don't. And by the way, I'll mention, I do talk to business leaders, and I'll say to them, there's a question everybody wants to ask, and they don't, because they don't think they're going to get an answer. And I ask them, what do you think the question is? All the times I've done this, there's a young guy named Zach who was 22-year-old frontline supervisor who ever got the answer. Business leaders themselves couldn't come up with it. But basically, it's this: what do I have to do to get a raise around here? And yeah, everybody laughs. And I tell people, I promise you, when you hear the answer, everybody's going to agree this is what it is. And I would, for years, I would think, why can't we answer this day one? And I used to think it's because, well, the boss doesn't really want to make too big of a commitment right up front. Don't know how this is going to go. But I really came to become convinced that there's a deeper answer to that question. The reason that they don't want to answer that question up front is because they really don't know. They really don't know what could a person do up front that if you give me this, or I get, this happens, that's worth more money to me. And that goes back to, what are the things you actually want from this person? What are the things, what can they put in your hand? How can they how can they contribute to your organization's success? And if it comes down to the salesperson, for example, the salesperson, you can ask a group of people, quick, what can how do you answer that for the new salesperson? And everybody says, bring in more sales. Yeah, absolutely. Why is the salesperson the only person in your organization that can get that answer? And if you can't answer that for everybody else, why do you have these people in the first place?
That's true.
So
it's a good point.
Thank you.
But it's thought-provoking, which is what I love. And it kind of gets me thinking as well. So, and I do want to go back to the whole value-centric leadership. Is that like, what is that? Is that like a framework that you've created in the book? How does that work?
Yes, it's a 9-step process. It's kind of scalable depending on what you'd want to do. But basically it's how do you drive this kind of thing through your organization? The first step is what we talked about, coming up with that understanding. What are the key drivers of value in your organization? What are the business results you look at? I call that, by the way, that document is called the same page. And the reason I call it that is because every boss I've ever had, they want to complain about why we're not getting this done. Why isn't everybody focusing on this stuff? And everybody says, we've got to get everybody on the same page. And I've thought, we've got a strategic plan. We've got a mission statement. We got core values. What is this fabled page then onto which everyone must be gotten, And so I came to recognize, I think if you're clear on what are the key drivers of value and the business results, well, that's the same page. So when you want to say, we everybody on the same page, get them on that. So that's the first step. And then there's some, there's a bit of, you could basically call it kind of strategic talent management. I mean, just kind of gut check before you roll out something like this. Do you have the right people in the business in terms of, do you have the right team that's going to drive this? Who are the people you're really going to look to in the business? Who are the ones maybe should be bumped up? Who are maybe some of the ones that have a more candid conversation about their longevity with the business or things like that? And there's some development, leadership development type work in terms of kind of making the mind shift, if you will, from moving away from the duties to the deliverables. Now, obviously, it doesn't mean duties don't matter. I mean, we can't think our way in something into existence, of course, but it's just, that's got its place. And those are really issues subordinate to just getting clear on what are the things you need people to deliver. So, so we spent some time on that, and we worked through something for different titles called success maps, which is kind of the level from taking the same page, what you discover on there. So if these are the things that the results the business has to produce, well, going through from at the departmental level, if you will, on down, well, what does each group of people, what do they have to contribute? What do they have to deliver? And there's a series of deliverables we identify for each one of those. And there are 5 levels we identify. The first being like, what's fully successful? So if this deliverable, what do I get that tells me I got it? Then also, what's the thing above that? You might say the exceeds expectations sort of thing. And then what would be something that the top 2% would deliver here? So if you're going to you want to blow the doors out of, really knock our socks off on this thing, give us to this level. And then below that, what's the thing where, hey, this isn't cutting it? And then below that would be, what's the level where if we don't get this fixed, you may not be with us anymore. This is really
Yeah.
something that could replace a performance appraisal. A lot of people have talked about, a lot of folks say we should scrap performance appraisals. I really think one of the biggest problems with that is when you look at so many of them, we see things like, we're having conversations about initiative and commitment to quality and so forth. I mean, this is not, this is a psychological profile. This is not a performance appraisal. And we're asking managers to, look into people's souls, if you will, and identify these abstract qualities that, that nobody buys actually. So,
Yeah. So what you're saying,
and it kind of goes.
I was just going to say, because what you're saying in the book is that you've written criteria for hitting certain benchmarks within performance-based, relatable, driving the business forward, right?
Yeah, it's outcomes though. It's really focused on what are those contributions.
Yeah, perfect.
I could give you one small example I have in the book very briefly, but
sure.
I was thinking about this one coming to my dentist. And I, said hi to the dentist, the receptionist, and I sat down waiting for my hygienist. And I thought, so if I really believe that we should be able to identify how every person contributes to success in the business, what about Cindy, the receptionist here in the dentist? How does she contribute to this? So I thought a little bit about, if she had a job description, it would include things like, she schedules patients when there's cancellations and she does the billing and so forth. And if you think about, where do you give somebody like her a raise up front? It's kind of hard to see it. If we're looking at the traditional job description, duties, focus sorts of things, but we drill through it. We think about value and contribution there. If you take scheduling patients when there's a cancellation and you ask yourself, why does that matter? Well, it matters because you've got billable staff that sits around for a while. My daughter is a dental hygienist, and I asked her once, so on balance, she's actually she works at that office. She's my hygienist, and I asked her, so on average, how many hours a week would you say you lose to cancellations? She said 5, at least. So, a little bit of math. I mean, that shakes out to about $40,000 a year for that office. And it's a small office. It's 5 years, that's $200,000. That's a lot of revenue to forego. So all of a sudden you can think about the receptionist, not so much in terms of be nice to people and, keep the files straight, but you could show her you're actually contributing to cash flow. You're maximizing the utilization of my billable staff. And when you look at it that way, all of a sudden this isn't such a quote unquote overhead job. But so.
Very good. There's one thing that kind of sprung to my mind. So I want to go back to what you just said, which is performance appraisals or performance reviews, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. And they're basically based on the principle of someone that's got a good attitude or shows initiative.
Right.
So really that they're basically psychological profiles really in disguise.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
But you're arguing we should actually pay people for what they should be delivered for, like the performance, right? Now, here's an interesting question. For a founder that is conscientious about cash flow or trying to scale for profitability, how does this actually change the way that you actually pay people and when? Is there any examples that you could give me?
Well, if you've got the success maps, for example, I have a process on those where, as I said, that really replaces the performance appraisal. I call it, I didn't have this in the book. I don't know why, but I actually call it a contribution review. So we're looking at what have you contributed? And there's a scoring process for each of those levels, where you determine someone contributes. And then I have a model for taking the results of all of those and plugging it into a budgeting model. So you can kind of decide, I want to do 3% merit, if you will, across the board. And you can take those scores and plug this into a model to show like, well, based on these ranges, these people get so much and those people get so much. So so you can, it's a very rational process and everybody can understand why did I get this and why did someone else get that. And the great thing about it, I had a couple of versions of this I used elsewhere, but one of the exciting things about it is it's not just a question of justifying why somebody got less than they wanted, but it's a way of helping managers help those people become more successful, because we can look at, okay, you got here, it's not where you want to be, but let's talk about how do we get you there for next year.
Yeah. Love that. Now, I know that we're coming towards the end of our conversation. Now, one thing that kind of springs to my mind before we wrap up, right, is I'm just thinking about some of our listeners right now. And now there are people out there, there are CEOs and founders that are exhausted, their team isn't performing for whatever reason, and they think, or their belief system is, hey, maybe I should just hire more people because, hey, that'll probably fix everything, right? And they'll walk in Monday morning. What is the one conversation they need to have, or the document that they need to create to start fixing this? Like, what is the actual first thing that they need to do? Any thoughts?
Yeah, the first thing really is that same page. What drives value in your business? What are the results you produce? And then think about, as you're interacting with your leaders, if you can sit down and say, instead of saying, I need you to do this or that, but think about it, preface that discussion when you want to unburden yourself of the frustration with this person or that person. Don't start it in terms of, this is what I need you to do, but to say, this is what I need from you. If you can clearly explain that to them, it's that simple. It's also that hard a lot of times. This is what I need from you. I need these things. Please help me. How do I help you? Give me these.
Basically, how to articulate and communicate the value proposition in a way so that it's a bit more clear and concise, and that you're trying to get everyone so that they understand your perspective, but also what's from their perspective, and if they're on board or if they're not on board, basically, is what you're saying. Yes,
absolutely. But framing it in terms of, again, the outputs, the nouns,
yes,
that you want to give them money for. What do you want to buy from them?
Yeah, very good. Love that. So we've covered a lot of groundwork here. Now, for me, this has actually been quite a fascinating conversation, and only because I didn't really kind of pre-anticipate that the conversation was going to go in these different directions. And for you guys that are listening in, by the way, I hope that actually Barry has given you a bit of a masterclass when it comes to HR and people are our most important asset, especially when we are scaling and exiting, right? And what I feel like has really shown, certainly what I've come off the back of the conversation, is that not one personality profiling or psychological model is going to fix, shitty performance in your business or scaling up. We need alternative thinking. And I think what Barry has kind of spoken about has kind of given me some food for thought, especially based around the 9 elements of the value-centric leadership that he spoke about. So I'll be making sure that I'll be listening to Barry's audiobook when he sends it to me when it comes out. So, but first of all, Barry, I just want to say thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. It's been a lot of fun, right?
Adam, it's been awesome. I'm a big fan. I hate to suck up. I'm going to suck up, I guess. I really like your podcast a lot.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. By the way, I did not pay for him to say that, by the way. I just want to full disclosure.
No, he did not. Nope.
Full disclosure. So, But listen, guys, in all seriousness, though, what I'd like you to do is, if you would like to connect with Barry, please do so by connecting with him on social media. You can obviously mention the podcast. Check out his when his new book's going to. When's your new book going to be coming out, Barry? By the way, I forgot to ask.
Well, the book is out right now on paperback, the hardcover, and Kindle. It's on Amazon.
Perfect.
The audiobook it's been a saga, but the audiobook should be coming out it should be out by the end of January. God willing.
All good. All right. Excellent. Fantastic. Well, listen, guys, what I would entirely endorse you to go and do is to make sure you head over to Amazon, go check out Barry's new book, of course, and remind the listeners what the title of it's called again.
It's called It's All in Your Head, Why Psychology Doesn't Help Your Employees Deliver Value and What Can.
Perfect. Love that plug. Excellent. Fantastic. For you guys that are listening, I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation. As I always say to you, if this is the first time you're listening to me, to the Business Strategist, congratulations. Make sure you hit that follow, subscribe button. And if this is a regular slot for you guys, welcome back. Thank you so much for supporting the podcast. And hopefully we'll see you again soon. Anyway, from me and Barry, thank you so much, and speak to you soon. Cheers now.